Oh, Jesse. Oh, hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know if I heard you before.
Oh, I was just saying hi. It looks like it may not be a lot of people today, but that's
Okay,
fine.
that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I know it's the week after U.S. Thanksgiving, so or the weekend of a couple days after. So, well, I'll go through some things that I found, and hopefully, we'll have the recording. People can catch up later. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for making the Notion notes page. That will be useful. All right. So I guess we don't really have any updates unless Jesse wants to give an update. Um,
Um, my updates are basically um, mostly just a reiteration of last week in that Society of Neuroscience was good. The reading group is now uh, into chapter 5 of Thomas Hughes' book. And I'm actually I started reading ahead a little bit. I'm not done with chapter 5, or I think it's chapter 5 now. I'm not done with the chapter we're currently reading, but I started looking ahead at some of like the rest of the book, and it's interesting. And um, I'm very curious where we're going to decide to go next with that. The reading group in general, but also um, kind of what we're left with after Varela and Fuchs, and to an extent, yes, Logiciel. It would be nice to kind of, I don't know if we want to go through Logiciel as in the reading group itself. I could see that being useful,
mhm.
but there's sort of this sense of I'm actually really glad that we've kind of gone the course we have now, and what I would like to do, or what should be done, is fleshing out kind of the methods project a bit more, and uh, but I really feel like there's a lot of substance to be drawn just from what we have read to this point. And it's kind of like there's going to be multiple paths to take, and I don't know. Look, it's a fun thing we can decide that later. Obviously, it's not going to be decided now, but I'm continuing to be excited about that. Um, so that's the Cognition Futures Rating Group. For Society and Ethics and Tech, the New York Celebration of Women in Computing 2023 deadline is about 2 weeks. They're starting to no, nothing happened this week, but previously I was with the volunteers, organizers meeting a little bit. So just a sense of where that's going, which is good. It should be a really interesting event. I keep thinking about how there's so many different things that we could talk about there. I kind of hope there's some submission of some kind about the cool summer of code stuff. But there's also just so many topics to talk about at that event. I have to, in other like lab admin news, it's time to do the curse application.
Right.
I've been looking at that a little bit more, and hopefully over this weekend that can be finished. That's sort of a timing thing for sure.
What do you mean by timing thing? Like time depend? What do you mean by timing thing? Like time or time?
The sooner the better we get that done.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that way people can see it when they're planning what to do next semester.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a cutoff for us, but more so, they're advertising forthcoming positions basically starting now. So they'll be publicizing them now to give people time to think about what they want to do over the winter break and stuff like that. So,
yeah. Why don't we meet this coming week on this if you want? We can have a separate meeting on, as we did last time, so we can plan out the different details of the application, because I know we had to come up with a description, although we can just recycle the description from last time and update it.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a little bit of a dilemma about I'm in trying to see this week actually should work for that, but I have a little bit of a dilemma in the sense of I may have to be taking a trip soon, but I don't know when, and that might affect some things, like what I'm like physically available for.
Okay.
But yeah, like this week, let's do that. I don't know if you have a sense of like or in the week, or I imagine not like Sunday, or like what time do you think would be good for you to do that? And if you have a general sense of it. If not, don't worry about it.
It really could be any time during the week if you have time. It doesn't have to be a long meeting, just to check in about it, make sure that we have it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fine. I'll try to probably do it earlier in the week. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I don't know if I said this last week or not, but for the open house, I did multiple recordings of the Society Ethics Text open house video.
All right.
And I am not content with any of them, with exception to maybe one of them, because one of them was like 40 minutes, and that's gonna be like a director's cut thing. And I don't think anybody's gonna watch a 40-minute videos of me talking about that.
What is it? What topic is it? The Society
Ethics and Tech
okay.
video. That was more like a full history of how did this come. Like it extended back before. It was very deep origins of how this came about. A bit of a personal story, I think, is what that evolved into.
Well, I think that might be fine. I mean, it's we can annotate the video so it like cues up to different parts of the video.
Yeah, but I'm absolutely gonna make essentially a 10-minute or less version, just so people can kind of know, like just a flyer, like a preview of what's going on. Yeah, I think that's important to have that. But it's been a bit of a a busy last few days in different ways, so I haven't had full time to do that. But I think my goal for that is going to be, I think there was something I was going to say about a potentially a plot twist video. I think I don't have. I have the sheet here. Internship program, that's definitely going to happen. Potentially today also. So ethics tech, yes. And I put some on the bottom of that as well. Probably cognition futures. I know I mentioned the research banners and page for everything, but also I feel like that maybe is not really useful given we have everything else covered at this point. So maybe just Codes and Futures, a very short plot twists video, which I'm mentioning in set anyways. There's and lastly, I guess I'll say there's plenty of stuff happening in well, for all the things I mentioned. I'm looking at the sheet, and we'll go at that later probably. But last substantial update, I suppose, is there's good news in Plot Twisters land. There's only so much I can say about it at this time, but things are going in the right direction there, and I will make a small video about that. It'd be a very, very, very small video, but just like basically like an advertisement for it. However, and this is something for Brad and I potentially to talk more about later privately for the time being. There may be an increasing opportunity to collaborate with Plot Twisters, or also I could see our lab hosting an internship basically for Plot Twisters. And what would that look like right now? Or I guess Joe Pro if the lab wanted other support in doing that. But what would that look like right now is a little bit tough to say, because a lot of the major work right now is in sort of world building, which is a very design experience, like that's a narrative and design thing. That's not really my forte. That's sort of the main thing right now. However, I could see a specific aspect of like basically game design and or potentially, and I'm not sure where we are on this front yet, but like virtual reality or 3D world creation may be a factor as well. And having an internship based along those lines, potentially working with me, because I may be looking into that aspect of things, is something on the table. Because I know that we've talked about a lot of different things in that sense within the lab, and sort of we kind of mentioned virtual reality stuff a lot and say, oh, we could do this here and here and here and here. But Plot Twisters may be, I could see that being a technical internship outright, as in if someone's really interested in virtual reality, potentially virtual reality game design or world creation or something for it, just from a purely technical level, that could be an option. Or there could be a version of it where it's less like less virtual reality developer centric, but still, story or narrative or whatever focus. And I don't really know what to say about that yet. I'll know soon. We're having another meeting soon about that, but things are going well there, and it's hard to believe that it's basically December now. Yeah. And I think my closing note for my updates is that it feels like I'm beginning to peek around the corner for next year, in that it's sort of been this, wall that you're approaching, and then it's like, okay, you're starting to like get around the corner, and it's interesting because I think I'm starting to feel excited and nervous about that in sort of new ways, because there's always that sort of unknownness, but there's also a lot of things that are already in development.
Yeah.
So yeah. Outside of that, I will say my football team actually won, which is great and unexpected. They have, just to be on the record, my team is Nebraska Cornhuskers, and they have been on the worst streak of losing in about, I think it's 60 years outright. But they beat one of their rivals on Black Friday yesterday, which was great. And hopefully they've already fired their head coach because they're that bad. They're hopefully hiring a new one and announcing that soon. And then the season on a good note, which is basically about as good as you could ask for with them right now. So that was great. I know there's a bunch of World Cup stuff going on too. I think some members of, I don't know about this lab directly, some folks have mentioned it in the chats, and also people at Platters are into World Cup stuff, I guess. So that's fun. But yeah, I hope everyone had a good holiday time and whatever that means to you or your friends and family. I've been able to have some good times myself, and hopefully people can have that too as they get ready for the winter, at least here in this part of the United States. I know Bradley's in the Midwest and I'm in the Northeast, so we will probably have snow. I didn't get any yet though, did you, Bradley?
Yeah, we did actually.
Okay. I heard that I think Avery in Michigan did as well. Okay. I don't know if that much it lasted, but
yeah,
I haven't really I've not had the first snow yet, but I'm sure it will come soon.
Yeah,
that's it for me.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that update. Yeah, we'll need to follow up on the plot twisters stuff and the New York Celebration of Women in Computing, and have to kind of think about a topic for that. I know we had talked about, we have the stuff from the open source ethics, so that's something that we could do. I think that was well received last year as part of the buffet. We could also do something in large language models. We're not experts at it, but we could do like some explorations of large language models, and kind of some of the things we've talked about in the group, and kind of go through that. I mean, there are different options depending on what people want to do. I think the most logical one would be the open source ethics. But
I'm curious, and I might just try to ask the organizers outright. Like, I don't know how, for lack of much better words, how controversial our presentation was last year. I don't think it really was. But if possible, I would actually think doing that same thing again would be great, because it's sort of like, I think maybe putting a little bit more into, I personally would love to just redo that, but maybe with obviously a little bit more like the technical actual like speaking of it or pre-recording stuff.
Yeah.
Will be where you go, yes. But also, I think maybe wrapping it up more with a bow of like an introduction session and a conclusion session, I think might be a little more, I don't want to say tasteful, but it might be a little bit more like, oh, this is the coherent, flow stuff.
Right.
But like, I think if it was up to me, I think I would do basically a similar big banner discussion of, oh, Bradley or Ryan or whatever, here's like 15 or 20 minutes on Google Summer Code, because I think that could be a nice chunk of it, and the whole open source ethics stuff. And I might add in some things about that thing I keep talking about from Society of Neuroscience, which is the mandate that's here, like it's here now, about the federal mandate about open data and managing your data from the National Institute of Health. Like, that's huge. That's not quite the same thing as that, but I think having I think having a direct discussion about that would be very adjacent and quite useful for, I think diving into that and explaining that at such a place as NICWIC, this is how we say New York Celebration of Women in Computing, NICWIC would be extremely on point and extremely appropriate for early career researchers to realize the gravity of, like what I've said before, like are you in a lab where this is the case, or have you been around that? Have you been exposed to managing your data, or do you know about open data? And do you realize, like, by the way, you as grad students and undergraduate students right now, or those going in those areas or working with such people, are going to be the front line of this new mandate. Like, I think that point, that could easily be a 10-minute presentation,
Yeah.
And that's already like 30 minutes of whatever we want to talk about. And I think we had like something like 90 minutes last time, or an hour or so. And it's just like, we could be filled up so easily. I think I would really like to do that again. It's just, what would other folks want to do?
Right.
Because, I think it would also be interesting to put a little bit about like recent events in tech news and the whole Twitter Mastodon stuff. I think that's relevant. And there's just so many other subtopics and categories to go in that route. Finding a theme, I could see some kind of a theme, not actually being open source ethics, but a theme being like, something about like sort of stuff you should know or preparatory. We kind of always do the same thing, but looking back at some of our past work, one of the three, it was sort of the year of the pandemic, and NICWIC got canceled. But the title of that project was essentially, how is AI or tech ethics going to affect our careers, basically. And that was basically that was the first big broad, we actually have basically 3 years running, I suppose, we have this concept of a buffet style presentation at NICWIC. The first one didn't really happen because the event was canceled. The second one was that effort of how do we integrate critical voices into like ethics discussions, which is a large flowing conversation of sorts. And last year we had the actual hybrid in-person event of, Brian's stuff about interpretability. You had the open source stuff. Amaris and myself had sort of a talk on tech news. Angela had data trusts, and Aaron talked about Log4 open source stuff as well. So, I mean, it's sort of like there's been maybe I phrased them in a very not good way at the start by saying, "Oh, I don't know how controversial it was," but more like, I kind of want to ask for some feedback from the organizers about it, and I think it will be fine. But outside of that, I think there's a lot of potential to do. It's just the same thing again. And I don't quite know what the banner or theme is, but something about sort of things you need to know as in a career of data science or tech ethics. Not necessarily data science or data privacy again, but like things you need to know as an upcoming early career person in technology. By the way, here are some like major topics we've been looking at and doing work on. Like something like that, I could see being a very easy stretch. And there could also have some other smaller topics, like I know people mentioned quite a bit about accessibility in different terms, like access to education about tech, or just sort of, fitting in with NICWIC's general purpose of making training accessible and open women led to women, or the folks who have been perhaps pushed away from technology. That's there and some other things too, but I'm elaborating on this because I don't have a lot of pressure to get off the topic. So I'm kind of just talking about with you openly here. We can run other things too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think the buffet, definitely that's a good opportunity for people to do, grab a topic and say, this is what I want to, really passionate about. I want to do a presentation on it. And then have an audience there where it's useful to them as well. So that's always good. As in terms of organizing it, I mean, that's I think, yeah, I like the pre-recorded sessions. And it's also nice to have, I don't know what kind of technology they have on site, but maybe having it set up so that we can get some sort of recording of it for our own uses.
Yeah, that was a drawback from last year, but this year, actually reminds me something I should probably get on some of the technology sales that are happening right now. But yeah, like this year, we can. They typically don't record sessions, but we could very easily just get kind of I could set up a camera of some sort, a recorder of some sort, and just do it that way.
Yeah.
Because it was a little bit tough. Like I got some pictures of Brian presenting, and I don't think anybody really got pictures of me presenting. But yeah, getting a whole scene recording would be good. So
right.
We can do that.
Yeah, they do have cameras like that, and it depends on how you set it up. But also, the audio is important in terms of where the mic is, or where people are able to hear. Sometimes you would have a mic, and you might you'd talk, and you'd have your mic, you'd be mic'd up, so that would be fine. And then it would be there would be a computer in the room, so everything would go into the computer. The camera would be kind of a member of the Jitsi session, and then so you'd see that, and then you'd hear the audio. And if someone's in the audience, you could either pass around a mic there, or repeat the question after they ask it and have the answer. And it would, so it would be basically you could see the audience, see the presenter, depending on how that works out, and then hear the presenter and hear the audience in some combination, and then hear everyone in the virtual session as well, and the recordings. I mean, because that evens it out. Because one of the things about these virtual sessions, and they did I just was at one that was run by the NIH, and of course they have the tech worked out, but basically they had a view of the room, they had a view of the presenter's slides, so that it wasn't necessarily the presenter, but that's something you don't need to have necessarily, and then if other people are in the session and they want to share what they're presenting, then that's just basically you want to be able to have a sense of presence of the venue and of the speaker and maybe of the audience virtually. But those are things you need to work out, and I think this year maybe we can work them out a little bit better, because last year we didn't plan as well or as much for that part. But I think we've learned some lessons from different events, and it should be good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Yeah, so let's plan. First step though is to propose the session and say this is how we're going to do it, and then we need to get people to speak. I'm willing to present on the. I guess we could do the open source ethics. Some insights about that. Imagine maybe Brian wants to talk about some of the stuff they're doing with sustainability.
Or even just talking about his experience at the Albany place done. I think that'd be really cool. Because you could see, we kind of have a before. We have an idea. We have the sort of the big idea. We have what happened in the summer, and we have what happened in the fall. And it's sort of I don't know if there should be different presentations or one whole big one, but there's a lot.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting story in and of itself. I imagine Brian will at least write a blog post after everything, but I think that should be really well documented. I think what has happened this year, in this sense, kind of going from the whole 2022 experience from Google Summer of Code, because basically it was all, Nick Wick last year, where he presented
right
on open source ethics, what will become the Google Summer of Code program. That was like spring, and then summer was the coding, and that whole process where we had the 3 candidates come in, and I did my mentoring stuff. And in the fall,
well, yeah.
which is like concluding now, we have this whole like it's been really a long story arc, and I think it's important to be captured somewhere.
Yeah. Also, the fall session, of course, is sponsored by a class at UAlbany, so that's kind of, I think,
Exactly.
there's a affiliation there with the conference. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to that end, the whole the evolution of it's been fun, and hopefully, I don't know where Brian is in terms of like a finished product or the web interface of what they wanted to do, but it's cool to show that off too. There'll be several more months now for the event itself, but we could maybe show it off at that event too.
Yeah, that would be great. So let's plan this out a little bit and figure out how we want to do it. I think we have a good base of ideas, and we need to kind of work out what we want to do. And I think the open source sustainability, and actually, the open data, the mandates from the NIH and the NSF, those are related to that, because that's open research and open research sustainability. Not something we didn't talk about in this project, but it's definitely adjacent, because there are a lot of issues of sustainability. That's why they want people to share their data, because the funding agencies pay a lot of money to researchers to produce data sets. And those data sets just kind of lay there. They get some papers out of them, but other than that, they get locked away. And if you want to talk about something like reproducibility, one of the main things about reproducibility is being able to go back and verify things with prior data sets, or understand how data was collected in a certain context. So this is something that is not a topic that you typically get in like a data science course, or even like a science course, like in any science like neuroscience or biology or anything like that. It's generally not a topic in a course. They have other things to teach, and it's not something that comes up. But this is something definitely that a lot of, especially big labs, they might be hiring lab managers to do this sort of thing, or if people go into research, they may be doing this thing themselves, where they have to maintain a data set and say, this is how we're going to put, there are different standards that you have to adhere to, different ways in which you archive data, you make it available to people. And it does help with the scientific enterprise, but it does cost some investment in terms of time and in terms of like protocols and practice. So this is actually would be quite nice to go through with this group, because they're probably not going to get this exposure anywhere else. It's not a mainstream topic in computer science, but it's still, I think, an opportunity for computer scientists or computer science students to do something really interesting, and maybe a career path for some people.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of importance around it. Absolutely.
Hello, Morgan. Yeah, nice to see you. Yeah, so, well, let's keep thinking about that. So let's go to some of the other things. Morning. Yeah, if you want to give an update, let me know. I'm going to move on to some other things here, though. Well, actually, first thing I want to talk about something Morgan related. Let me share my screen here. I don't know if we have it in here. No. Okay, this is it. So I think it was yesterday where there was this conversation in the Slack on maybe hosting an event like a hackathon. And we've talked about this in a number of contexts in the past. And this is something that I think would be a very good social activity for the lab in general, to have like a hackathon where people are coming together and maybe participating in a problem solving session or doing something in a different organization. Ankit Grover asked in the Slack, what if a few of us from Orel participated in a hackathon together? Would anyone be down for that? And I pointed out that Morgan is involved in NeuroTechX. He's a chapter lead, and he's talked about hackathons in the past. So Morgan said, I would love to do something for Brain Hack if that's not too soon for people. The results of the NeuroTechX Hackathon Data Challenge should be available soon and can be written up as a crowdsourced results paper. And so these are opportunities. I would like to be able to maybe interface with NeuroTechX in this way. Like, I think they do a lot of interesting and good. Um, I don't want to run our own hackathon. If we run our own hackathon, it would be like a local thing, where we'd maybe work on a problem together. But if we work through NeuroTechX, we might be able to do some things with neuroscience data or some other things that would be, I think, of really strong value to people in the lab, just getting experience with something like that. And so,
kind of like, have we talked about like when that would be? Because I know, I think it'd be a nice like foil to some of the NeuroMap summer stuff for sure. Sorry.
I don't know what the dates are. I think, let's see. Morgan mentioned that Brain Hack is a collaborative hackathon and runs all year. Brain Hack Global 22 is going on from now till mid-December. So this is like, there are opportunities now and there are opportunities later, basically. But yeah, we could plan it out maybe a little bit and find a right thing people want to be involved in. An ad hoc thing is fine, but I don't know how much participation we'll get out of it. Like, I don't want to make sure it's useful for people. And then, we can do things around this. Like we can build, opportunities like we did with the open source ethics, path. We could build from the event. So people would do something in a hackathon and then maybe carry things over into other activities in the lab. So Morgan said here, I would recommend that anyone interested in participating sign up for an account at the Neuroscience Gateway. This is nsgportal.org, as it takes them several days to follow up. I've had people use NoiseBridge and NeuroTechX as affiliations, as they are both registered nonprofits. So I guess you have to use a registered nonprofit as an affiliation. I don't know. We're not a registered nonprofit, but sorry if it wasn't clear why this is useful. You can process data from nemar.org directly with Neuroscience Gateway. It's the front end for the San Diego Computing Center cluster. So this is NEMAR's website. Another resource the lab could use is brainlife.io/projects. So there's BrainLife. There are links to BrainLife.io from openneuro.org now. Here's a spreadsheet of resources links I put together in the NeuroTechX Hackathon. So this is something for the hackathon at NeuroTechX, a spreadsheet. This is all in the hackathon channel on the Slack. So if you want to go to the links, you can do that. Here are projects people have proposed for Brain Hack Global 2022. So if we go to we could actually go to the hackathon channel here. And let's maybe take a look at some of these projects. This is the Brain Hack Global 22 page. And so people put together projects on different topics in neuroscience. There's Bayes on the Brain in Python, which is using Bayesian models to look at human brain imaging data. There's metagenomic analysis of gut microbiome. There's brain harmonic generating music from brain signal data using deep learning. So there's a very broad collection of projects here, containerizing things. This is the BIDS. This is BIDS, which is it's like a platform or protocol for open data. It's containerizing that. Hacking Brain Hack, which sounds pretty recursive. Actually, there's a large scale FPGA neuromorphic interface precursor work. This is like something to do with neuromimetic computing, neuromorphic computing. Yeah, so I mean, basically, you need to have like an idea. You need to refine it a little bit and then participate. So yeah, this is something we can work on, or we could, I guess, just participate in one of the projects. But okay, yeah, Morgan says he can say more about this in a few minutes. So yeah, why don't we? Yeah, if you want to talk about it, I can move on to some other tidbits, and then we can talk about it more. But that's just a taste of what is going on in that world. We can maybe talk. We can talk about it in a bit and plan. In the coming weeks, if people are interested. Just really soliciting involvement on our end too, is having people who want to commit to it. So yeah, Morgan, let me know when you want to speak. I'm going to talk about some other things here. So a couple other things. This first one is that we did the BICA conference, of course, back in September, and presented on metabrain models, a certain version of that. So this is the proceedings, which are now out in Procedia Computer Science. So this is the 2022 Annual International Conference on Brain-Inspired Cognitive Architectures, or BICA, for Artificial Intelligence. This is their 13th annual meeting. So this is the proceedings for the entire meeting. These are all open source papers, and just kind of every paper that was submitted for publication. So they offer a lot of options when you submit something to BICA. They offer, first of all, do you want to give a talk? Do you want to give a poster? And do you want to put a paper in? There were like 2 tracks. One was in a I think a cognitive systems journal, and the other one was in Procedia Computer Science. So we got the Procedia track. We also got to present, and we also had a poster presentation. So they're pretty flexible in terms of coverage during the conference, which you want to present. This was, of course, a hybrid conference where they had people in person in Mexico, and then they had people around the world virtually. But these are the papers. This is the proceedings. So there's a lot. I think there are a lot of papers here. I don't even know how many. It's probably maybe 100 or more. But our paper is here. And this is layers, folds, and semi-neuronal information processing. This is a paper. It's sort of a flavor of the metabrain models. This is the full citation now. This is myself and Jesse are the authors on this. So yeah, this is it's a Science Direct article. I'll post it in the Slack for people to access, or I guess you can just search this in Procedia Computer Science, and you should be able to get a copy of it. It's open source, or it's open access, I guess. Yeah, so this is the paper came out pretty well. It's formatted. I don't know if you can see the formatting. It's not, it's standard Elsevier formatting, but we have, looks like it came out pretty well. So yeah. So Jesse put that on your CV?
Yeah, I was gonna actually, I was gonna kind of make a joke like, I, it feels like I've just updated my CV, but I think it's been several months.
Yeah.
And now it's all this like other stuff, which is of course great, but also like, oh yeah, like this thing here and this thing here. And there's been so much stuff about Vika that I think I'm just gonna have to like kind of put all my stuff, make a list of all the things that are going on and say, hey, does this sound like what actually happened this year in terms of like publication stuff? Yeah, that's like a whole different timeline of when things come out, and like are official and what's a fully published thing or not. But yeah, that's really cool. I'm happy that it's there, and I think that's between that and all I think I asked Bradley this week about something about like competitive cells or competitive versus non-competitive and regulatory stuff, and
Right.
of course there's a Michael Levin paper about stuff. So I feel like there's sort of this interesting thread of stuff in that vein, and just like the sort of, I'm fortunate to kind of be dipping into some of like the that aspect of things and continuing to ride the line between some of the bio stuff and going beyond that, and being able to go to because they're a really interesting conference in this way. I'm always happy to be a part of it. So I don't know. My thoughts turn to next year because that's where we are, but we can talk more about that some other time. But yeah, thank you for all. Bradley did most of the work with this and kind of led all the charge on the Vika stuff. So I thank you to you for that.
No problem.
It was exciting.
Yeah, and it was a little. Well, we had the Vika conference last year, and then the paper didn't come out until February, and it was a different different venue. Like the publisher was different, so they had a different timeline. Then we got the conference in September. The paper's already out, so it's like two in the same year. But it was really just kind of, 21 and 22 in terms of the conference. So.
Hi, Bradley.
Hi, how are you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey.
Good. I'm in the car, but I pulled over.
Oh, good.
Even though Tesla's rolled out full self-driving to all owners, which is actually rather frightening.
Yeah.
But just wanted to say a bit more about BrainHack and the opportunities there and the projects that might be interesting to work on as a group. The most recent thing is, of course, the NeuroTechX Hackathon that has already passed, but again was kind of a trial run of working with an actually large data set, right? So the NeuroTechX Data Challenge was using the Child Mind Institute Healthy Brain Network data set. So this is, so far the funding is going to have, I think, 10,000 subjects, but they're at like 3,000 or so now. And so this is a data challenge where the participants are given access to, it was more like about 2,000 subjects so far, but to do brain age prediction from EEG, resting EEG. And there's some other cool things where, in terms of how people could access this, and I put that, so NEMAR is this new data hosting service that's run out of San Diego, but together with OpenNeuro. And like I said, people can sign up at the Neuroscience Gateway, and you can basically, you don't have to now download, 300 gigabytes worth of data. You can you can just submit jobs through the neuroscience portal, the neuroscience gateway portal, and do things with that data set. So the other cool thing is that, there's actually some really, some new and interesting ways to access computational resources that, hopefully will make these kinds of data challenges and collaborative hackathons, more accessible for everyone, and kind of the analyses more, well, computationally intensive if they need to be, if you see what I mean. Because we've done previously an epilepsy challenge that was again, like I thought was really interesting, but like the teams that won it were like very, were academic teams that had worked in this space before and had access to their own clusters. And it seems to be a bit of an advantage. So we didn't get around to doing things like the NeuroDesk team, and you'll see NeuroDesk is one of the projects that is one of the BrainHack Australia projects. But the NeuroDesk team had even offered to, or basically they've made their Oracle Cloud Compute Resource Grant available. Because NeuroTechX is a nonprofit as well, that we could basically request cloud compute time, and the very cool thing about the NeuroDesk project is that it seems like it's a great infrastructure project where it's like they've made it really easy for others to now use Oracle Cloud resources, and I mean, check out NeuroDesk. But it's like, especially if you're doing a hackathon, you can spend like a weekend just helping people install tools that they might need for a project, and NeuroDesk kind of like does all that for you. I think we talked about it a couple of months ago.
Maybe,
yeah. Anyway, that's another great project where it's like, makes doing hackathons much easier.
Yeah.
And they would love to collaborate on things. So it's Stefan Bowman is the kind of lead developer, and then Tom Johnston is it's like the head of the ANU Imaging Center, I think. But they would love to work on something, so there's lots of brain hacks going on right now. I don't know if you saw that schedule. There's probably going to be like maybe 20 local events, and each of them kind of has a small set of projects that they've proposed, but they all submit them to the BrainHack Global GitHub.
Okay.
So the idea being that like hopefully, different local events will kind of collaborate on the same project, and we could submit, Orthogonal Research Education Lab could submit for its own like BrainHack event, and just select a project for from one of the global ones, and just spend like 2 days just working on that. It's just a web form you fill out, and it's BrainHack's kind of just an organization to help get the word out and give it some more profile, and kind of as well as like give it some more infrastructure.
Right. And then, so these projects are like things that are on like long-term projects that people have that they're soliciting help on. Or
Yeah, I mean, like again, like I think that's kind of the hope in the sense that like, I mean that was certainly one of my issues with the NeuroTechX hackathon was like, I didn't. It would be a shame, because they had about 500 participants, a couple weeks ago, and it would be a shame to like start 40 projects
right.
that don't really get past being a demo and a just past the weekend project, right?
Right.
And it would be a great use of all these people's time to be working on things. I mean, as well as like so many people have already said that they'd love to come back, and I think Belgrade is already doing. I think next weekend Belgrade's doing another event, and they're kind of trying to do that in the sense of like come back and keep working on your project.
Right.
And sometimes what BrainHack does is so it's like the 10th anniversary I think of BrainHack, and sometimes people put together a BrainHack which is like focused on something. So I think like China did one which was like micro to macro that was focused on like diffusion imaging. I was thinking maybe you'd want to do one where it was like focused on like a Devo worm focused or like a C. elegans focused, various projects that are all relate to aspects of C. elegans research or modeling or something like that.
Yeah, that could work.
And you kind of draw globally labs that are interested in that kind of work or have been doing that kind of work, and as a way to just get students involved or people who are interested in working on something to get some more visibility for a project that they're working on.
Yeah, that would be great. And we also have the tie into OpenWorm there. So the OpenWorm Foundation, of course, is a nonprofit, so we can use that.
Yeah. And there's I mean, as I understand it, right, there's tons of sub projects to OpenWorm.
Oh yeah, and the C. elegans community has a lot of like open data and other things that can be
and so I think I might have posted this on the Demon Network is a dementia research network in the UK, but there's some interesting. So just like there's now really access to some what I would consider large but like important data sets in terms of their size, imaging data sets. There's again, UK Biobank is this is such a large data set, but in multiple domains, right? So it's not only it's super important in terms of its size, both in imaging but also in genomics. And you can do things with it that in terms of finding behavior, brain relationships, right? It's got the requisite size to be able to find these small effects. But the same with genomics, and like you're saying, like there's lots of C. elegans resources in both the genetics and as well as imaging as well as development. You can kind of make a brain hack that tries to pull all those together, or at least get people interested in all these different aspects of it. That I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that'd be great. So Yeah.
And these days, the San Diego Supercomputing Center makes those, the idea is that, lots of people don't have access to the kind of resources that you actually need to be able to process something like UK Biobank. And Neuroscience Gateway is one resource that will give you the opportunity, and it's really just signing up. They've already got the funding to give people the compute time. So everybody can sign up now without any cost or anything like that, just to get through the sign up phase, because they might come back with some questions, so it sometimes can take a couple weeks. And also check out Brain Life. So that's a Indiana University resource that I think it's Frank Pistelli started, who's now at UT Austin, but it's Indiana University based, and it also gives it's nicer in that it gives you a kind of more flexible programming access to the cluster, but both are giving you a bunch of pre-installed tools and access to very large data sets.
Right. And that's like the key to getting this stuff.
Yeah. Those are the things that, you can create, or, I've certainly done this before, where it's like tried to create your own resource in using AWS.
Yeah.
And one, it's still going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Making AWS into a suitable compute cluster is actually a lot of work.
Right.
And you probably know that, like, David Kennedy and others at Nitric have kind of done that. We still ended up having to kind of roll our own, but using various resources, and you can find this off of Center 17. But yeah, it's like, if you're gonna process 3,000 subjects,
yeah,
it was a great proof of concept, but you would still need to get $50,000 to be able to pay for the compute time to process something that big, UK Biobank big.
Yeah,
I mean that's something like I think it's 20 or 30,000 subjects now. Is what they make available.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's always a problem is the compute resources, and it's great when you have those things kind of put in place so you can get, you don't have to deal with that hurdle. And of course, setting up the tools is another thing that's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's really it's great, that today you can use things like NeuroDesk, have all the tools installed, and they will integrate with, they'll make the Oracle Cloud Engine or infrastructure available via the back end, and so you're kind of using a Linux desktop in the browser, but you can start jobs on using compute resources, remote, cloud compute resources. And so I think, just getting that to work is still a little clunky, but would be, again, like a great project. Even just working on that, seeing, doing some example analyses of big data sets using cloud compute resources would be a great project. Just showing people that it can be done.
Yeah.
I think, and it's been great because we got a lot of participants here in San Francisco for the hackathon that had backgrounds in neuroscience, but they were now working for companies and didn't have affiliation, so
Right.
didn't have access to those kind of resources.
Yeah.
Or they were working at a company. I mean, some were even at a neurology, startup kind of company, but still didn't have access to those kinds of, couldn't use the company resources for this kind of educational project.
Right. Well, yeah. So we'll have to kind of plan this out, and I'll see what kind of interest there is. And I think the best,
I don't know what was it, Ankit?
yeah, it was Ankit Grover.
Yeah. I don't know what he might be interested in, but I think there's definitely a lot of things that if choosing one of the brain hack projects, even if it's not this December, the nice thing being that there's people to follow up with, and I think you'll see those projects will eventually be picked up by somebody else again next year.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll follow up in the channel and see gauge interest, and maybe I think this is a good time to kind of work some of these details out so we can have a hackathon, but we can do that offline. So well, thank you for that overview. That was very informative, and I think we nailed down kind of what we're looking for in terms of hackathon experience. It's very important to have a good seamless experience if we want to do it again after the first one, because you can have these events where people just don't want to do it anymore. It's like, you have problems with installing software or knowing what you want to do. And like, I know hackathons seem like they're ad hoc, but they're really not. They require a lot of planning and things like that. So thank you, Morgan, for that overview. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. I want to go over some more things, some more in-depth topics here. The first thing I want to talk about is an update on the brain's behavior and complexity curriculum. And this is, we've talked about this before. This is where you can go to this. This is on the Representational Brains and Phenotypes website. And this is basically, all the things you need to know to get ramped up in this area of brain's behavior and complexity. If you're missing knowledge or if you want to gain knowledge in a certain area, you can go to this, and these resources are all free. They're online. So, there's a lot of stuff here, but it really is tailored to a host of different needs. So it gives you like a range from like formal course materials to different types of resources that you might go back and forth and draw from. So I've been adding to this over time, and the presentation here is just in different topical areas. But we might rethink this presentation to make this more accessible to people. But I've been adding to this. I've found some new resources in artificial life, in complexity theory, in data science, neurosimulation we've added. We've also added neuroevolution. We've added the Braining Club. Some soft materials, organoids, and in vitro models section. So this is for people interested in, the more biological side of things. So we have some nice resources here, some talk series, and then open source and hackathons. So, I'm trying to make this inclusive to a lot of things that we talk about in the meetings, and things that might be, not just like agent-based modeling, or surely there's no agent-based modeling heading here, but, or computational neuroscience, but other topics as well that might be useful to people. This is, again, we can talk, I'm going to maybe rethink the presentation style of this, but I just wanted to make people aware that this was being built upon continually. So this is something that, it's on Representational Brains and Phenotypes website. If you go to the EDU stub, it's down here, Brains, Behavior, and Complexity Curriculum. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's good. Thanks for the thumbs up. The next thing I want to mention is the main conference, which is the Montreal Artificial Intelligence and Neuroscience. Yeah, so this is the Neuro AI event. It's a primary Neuro AI event. It's hosted by the group that works in Montreal. There are a lot of people working in Montreal on artificial intelligence and Neuro AI, this hybrid area. And so this is the unique Neuro AI Center. And this year they're doing the main conference in two different parts. So the first part is this educational session, which is the one I wanted to draw everyone's attention to. And the other one is the actual conference. Both of them, I think, are hybrid. So I think both of them have an in-person component, and then they both have a virtual component. And you can sign up for both of them. This is the educational one. I think people might get a little bit more use out of this because it's really, it goes through Neuro AI and sort of their point of view on Neuro AI, so their perspective on it. So they're interested in getting people involved in thinking about this hybrid area. So there are two parallel tracks running over 2 days. And the first one is AI for Neuro, which is taking people who are more neuroscience based and introducing them to AI. And then Neuro for AI, which is where you have neuroscience topics tailored for an audience familiar with artificial intelligence. So you have that, usually when you have these hybrid fields, you have people coming in from different areas. So in the DevaWorm group, for example, we've often had that where we have computer scientists who are interested in biology and developmental biology, and biologists who are interested in some of the computer science topics. And so you have to, tailor the content differently for those different audiences, because they know a lot about, say, if you're a neuroscientist, you know a lot about the different techniques for measuring the brain, and you may know some neuroanatomy and behavior, but you're not really familiar with like a lot of the AI work that's been done. Inversely, if you're an AI person, you may not be very familiar with a lot of the measurement techniques that you can use in looking at studying the brain. So this kind of goes through both of these perspectives. And then they have some hands-on and theoretical lectures that you can attend. It's using Python, which is, of course, a common language for... the lab is very well versed in Python, I think. At least that's one of our main languages that we like to use. And so this is a hands-on thing. If you want to do this, I think the in-person part is sort of more hands-on than the virtual part. And this is, again, these hybrid events. You have to plan them out in certain ways. So it'd be interesting to see how they handle this. But you can register.
Is there a specific I'm a little bit confused, and maybe I just missed it. Like, which part is the virtual and what's in person?
Well, both the educational and the main session of main are both hybrid. I think it's just that, in person you have people face to face, so they're doing some of the stuff like in a room, and then if you're virtual, you're doing the same. Well, I guess you're doing similar things, but there's certain things you can't do virtually. So I'm not sure how they're going to run all this. It looks like, in-person registration is going to be very limited. Online participation is unlimited. So usually the way that works is like you may or may not be able to fully participate in some of these hands-on activities because it's just not feasible to do that remotely. But you can follow along, I guess. So I don't know how they're going to actually run this. It'd be interesting to see. The speakers for, I think this is the educational We have a number of speakers that we've seen, Neuromatch and other places. And they're going to do, Patrick Minial actually did I think we're going to talk about his position article later about what good is Neuro AI or something like that. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so, yeah, this is a nice selection of speakers here. And they have an installation tab here where they tell you how to install your software before you come to the session. So this is, I think they're going to run this off of a Discord server where they communicate with people about, how to get things running. So, these things are like we were talking about with the hackathon. These things are all things you should sort of address before you attend the hackathon, before you show up at the hackathon. But, I don't know what the state of play is for the virtual component. There's the main conference itself, which I don't know if I can get to from here, but it's going to have speakers, and it's going to be less hands-on, but it's going to be all, for most people, it's going to be virtual. Most of our people, there's going to be a in-person component. Okay, after this, could we talk about NeurIPS briefly? Okay, yeah. Do you want me to bring up the NeurIPS link, or do you want me to let you talk about it, Jesse?
I don't have a whole lot to say. I was just curious if people heard about it or thought of anything particularly interesting so far, because I think I'm going to be able to get like virtual access to it, and I have no idea. I remember things that did in the past, but I don't know yet like what I'm going to try to hit there. But
yeah,
the workshops, a lot of things look cool just on the front page, but that's all.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the workshops page of NeurIPS. So this is Neuroinformation Processing Systems. This is the annual conference. It's coming up in maybe a week or two. When is the date for the conference? Is it just
NeuroIPS?
Yeah.
A lot of the workshops are starting the 2nd or the 3rd. Some are the 9th. But basically, next week.
Yeah.
I think the official date is the 2nd, is the first day of the conference.
Okay.
I'm looking around here at this. Well, the expo starts Monday.
Right.
Conference sessions start Tuesday, and then the workshops start Friday. So I guess the workshops are kind of like at the end of it, or well, I don't know. It basically starts next week. That's the short answer.
Right. Looks like there are a lot of they have it mixed in, so they don't have like just the. Looks like there are a lot of workshops mixed in with the.
I didn't see this. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Can you send me that? Let's just start the calendar link.
Yeah, it's the calendar link. And this, so there are a lot of interesting affinity workshops, invited talks. Looks like there was this one talk here, the data-centric era, how ML is becoming an experimental science. The forward algorithm for training deep neural networks. It's Jeff Hinton. Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. Alondra Nelson, making automated systems work for the American people. She works in the Biden administration as a AI expert, so it's it'd be fun. Conformal prediction in 2022. There's a lot of diversity here in terms of the different talks and workshops. In terms of the workshops, you have there are just a lot of them that look interesting. I don't even know where to point our attention. There's new frontiers in graph learning that might be interesting to check in on, just from the standpoint of some of the interests in the DeVorm group, actually, where we're working on graph neural networks. So that might be interesting if we could get materials for that, or if that's something you can check in on. Then there's Then there's the shared visual representations in human and machine
That's
intelligence.
one we applied to.
What was that?
Before, right? We applied to them before. In the past,
Yeah, this one. But this is, this looks like it's probably always a good session here. Workshop website. So you have to go. Well, they can't find it. Okay. There's a lot of stuff here. It's temporal graph. So there are 2 graph learning workshops. There's temporal graph learning, and then there's this other one, New Frontiers in Graph Learning. So this is just like, a very hot area. Symmetry and geometry and neural representations. NeuroReps, that's sounds interesting. A causal view on dynamical systems. So there's some dynamical system stuff there. Neurocausal and symbolic AI. This workshop here. Again, another graph learning one. Well, cultures of AI and AI for culture. That might be interesting. I don't know. Okay, this is research in AI and ML have shown how human values and biases are baked into AI. For instance, through annotation practices, training data pipelines, model design choices, and through large organizational incentives. It sounds kind of like the collaborative work sessions that they have at the human-computer interaction conferences. But I don't know. I mean, it looks like it's interesting. Not really sure. Yeah, there's some pretty interesting sessions here.
Yeah, I kind of forgot that it started next week, so I'm just like, I started looking at it. So you say, maybe map out some things later, and I don't know. As usual, I can try to get stuff for the lab.
Yeah.
This request or whatever. So.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting set of sessions. Yeah, let's keep that in mind. I don't know what's available virtually or off. Kind of like people weren't registered. I'm not registered, but if you could provide some updates or maybe establish a notion with some of the materials in it, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Morgan asked, so many workshops. Have you talked about Galactica already? Are you here last week, Morgan, or in the meeting? So we had a session on Galactica last week. I don't know if you remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might have missed the beginning of that.
Yeah.
But just again in terms of what Galactica was trying to do, like this conference is a perfect example where it's like there's too much work to process, So I mean, with all the developments in large language models, it still seems like I mean, I guess I was more like we talked about the controversy and like why it's now that it's been taken down and like did that even make sense? Like just because again it was a proof of concept and,
right,
and an appropriate proof of concept in the sense that like we want to make systems that can digest superhuman amounts of material.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of the point. So I mean, I'd love to see more projects like that, or more projects that projects that try to hack hack ICLR. What can we do? There's a YouTube there's a YouTube creator who does like ML content, and I just know his first name is Yannick, and
Okay.
it was really interesting in his discussion of Galactica. He he brought up a discussion of a conversation of Gutenberg with a scribe about the printing press, and I think it was really interesting in the sense that like anyway, I mean, just as an example of something, like could we get I mean, it would it'd be awful to rank papers or something like that, but like yeah, could we find interesting papers at ICLR with by processing all papers that were submitted to the conference or something like that. Like again, I don't want to do it where it's like people feel like it's a ranking or a leaderboard or something, but like how well does summary text summarization match, or like what are some of the themes of papers that are recommended by reviewers that you can find in the papers? Are there commonalities in the papers? And part of it was just like this discussion with Gutenberg, where it was like, what are the things that the scribe found really kind of frightening about the technology?
Yeah.
like those are probably those things that the scribe didn't like about the technology are probably the things that we should be leaning into.
Yeah.
But it's still in a principled way, and like in ways that the output is useful and interesting and revealing.
Yeah, I'm interested in like sort of playing around with large language models for like research. I mean, maybe not like, well, maybe generating research, helping you generate research. Like we said at the end of last week's discussion, it's really about like this human AI symbiosis, much less than like just throwing stuff at it and seeing what happens. I want to be able to like maybe write a paper with some help, and we did the Lex demo a couple weeks ago where I took like the abstract and I generated potential endings. And so I mean it'd be nice to be able to have a tool where you could like it would help you maybe get out of some writer's block or figure out what's interesting about what you're writing. How does it match up with like things in the literature? So it gives you these keywords. You say, okay, that's but then also, finding references would be good too, or being able to find your way through the literature, not just like finding key references, but finding interesting pathways to new things. And I think that's, but that's something that, I don't know how it would just require some, like maybe some sitting there and like maybe some sessions, maybe like some hackathon type style sessions where you say, we're going to try these things and see what they do.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I really hope Galactica's like components all still remain open source and available for exactly that. And you mentioned Patrick Minot. He posted recently that he was using Copilot to help himself learn Haskell. So he's a software engineer, knows lots of languages, wants to learn a new language, and was actually using Copilot as an augmentation aid to learn a new programming language faster, which I thought was an interest. Again, like another a great example of like that wasn't exactly what it was intended for.
Yeah.
But that's that would be a great that would be great to have a tool that helps you learn a new language, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it would be great. Yeah, the Copilot is, of course, the GitHub tool that you can use to like write code or helps you write code.
Yeah, and I don't want to don't want to distract us from the what you were talking about, but I posted that MindViz paper, but this is how it's just kind of relevant, is that the people have been using like stable diffusion and kind of some of the technologies behind DALI and things like that to process neuroimaging data.
Oh wow.
and not exactly, but they've been using this kind of the same underlying technology. So at the SFN, one of the kind of stellar presentations was from Alexander Huth's lab, where they were had people watching movies and recording them in the scanner, with fMRI, and then we're able to decode the visual recordings that they had and output a kind of text description of what the person's viewing. And again, like an amazing amazing pipeline of various tools that have been coming out as both ML or AI tools, but for analysis, an analysis pipeline of real significance.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
And so there's a couple of those things would be really interesting to talk about too. Anyway, check out that MindViz. I'll try and find a link for the Huth paper too, if I haven't already posted that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Okay, yeah, and so that was a kind of a follow up to what we were talking about last week, which was the Galactica demo, and they had to take it down. But it's really, one of these large language models where you can try to use it to augment what you're doing. So, humans have strengths in terms of how we think about topics, and AI has strengths. And I mentioned, I think last week, about hybrid chess, which is like this type of chess where, because humans have been beaten by AI in playing chess, and they've beaten the world champion and all that. We know that chess is good at maybe looking ahead a number of steps in the process of planning out moves. So we also know that humans have their strengths in terms of being creative with playing a game, and so you can match those two up. You can say, I have a human player who's going to do a lot of things, like know how to play the game and how to play the rules creatively, and then an AI that can plan ahead. Or we've even seen in a previous meeting, we saw a paper where AIs were playing adversarial rules, where they were basically trying to cheat the rules of the game, finding loopholes. And so you can use those things together, and that's actually quite interesting and exciting. And so that brings me to this thing that came out this week. So this is from Meta AI Research. So this is the same company that did Galactica, but they have this new platform called CICERO. And this is an AI agent that negotiates and persuades and cooperates with people. So this is what they're doing here, is they're trying to do diplomacy. And so this is something, again, like chess, that is something humans have done for years. We have strategies for this, but we're now using an AI to maybe augment our ability to build these strategies, and figuring out ways that maybe a number of countries can come to a peaceful agreement on something, to avoid war, or to avoid other conflicts, And so this picture is here. You have 4 countries, all with their own competing interests, and you're trying to negotiate some sort of peace. And Cicero, of course, is reference to the Roman Cicero. So, they talk about games being a proving ground for AI advances. They talk about Deep Blue, which is the chess AI, or AlphaGo, Mastering Go, to Pluribus outbluffing the best human in poker. So Pluribus is a poker AI that's beaten the poker players. But truly useful, versatile agents will need to go beyond just moving pieces on a board. So again, these games where you have like Go or chess or even poker, you're trying to plan out a number of different alternative scenarios. And of course, algorithms are really good at that because they have, they can take all these combinations. They're very good at combinatorics and combinatoric sorting, basically. But this is different because this is we're announcing a breakthrough towards building AI that mastered skills that involve using language to negotiate, persuade, and work with people to achieve strategic goals similar to the way humans do. This agent Cicero is the first AI to achieve human-level performance in the popular strategy game Diplomacy. So again, this is a game, but it's a different type of game than chess or Go or some of these other things. Cicero demonstrated this by playing webdiplomacy.net, an online version of the game, where Cicero achieved more than double the average score of the human players, ranked in the top 10% of participants who played more than one game. So it's become like a star player. And this is the video here. It's kind of playing in the background. So this is Diplomacy has been viewed for decades as a near impossible grand challenge in AI because it requires players to master the art of understanding other people's motivations and perspectives. So that sort of theory of mind that we talk about a lot in like the Cognition Futures group. And then this is sort of an application of that where you have to sort of infer what other people are thinking. And, you also have to make complex plans and adjust strategies and then use natural language to reach agreements with other people, convincing them to form partnerships and alliances. Cicero is so effective at using natural language to negotiate with people in diplomacy that they often favored working with Cicero over other human participants. Okay, yeah, I don't know if... So this sounds like something Jesse would be quite interested in. I don't know if he has anything to say about it, but...
I haven't had any time to look into it, but if you could post that link, I saw Morgan posted a video about it, which I'll look at. And I've been meaning to get into it. I haven't had time to yet. But yeah, thank you for sort of previewing this.
Yeah.
I posted it in Ethics, Society, and Tech.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was wrapped in a tweet. it was wrapped in somebody's tweet, which is like, I don't know if this is a good direction for AI. Teaching machines to deceive.
Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. I dropped a link. So Yannick Kilcher is the YouTube ML guy.
Okay.
That did the Galactica discussion that included the really interesting Gutenberg historical reminiscing. But his Cicero breakdown was interesting too because he talked with some diplomacy players. So he does a good job of kind of getting into the paper, and in particular in this case, talking to people about Diplomacy the game, and he found some, I think some very good criticisms. Found some like, I don't want to say flaws in the paper, but that it kind of reflects basically something that humans are bad at,
Right.
So, because the agents are always going to play algorithmically, and he had some questions about like how well could the agents NLP interaction actually modify their game engine behavior. Because again, like in the algorithmic case, you need to make the rules for that, right? The programmer is responsible for the rules for that. And there was a question of like, basically how well had they done at that? Whereas, just going back to kind of like Alicea in the 60s, like humans fall very easily for, this person's generating text. I should trust them. Or I can start to believe that this is an interaction that is social.
Yeah.
And that, I think some of his very practical considerations about it were I think spot on. But still really interesting, and I thought it was. I don't know if you can find this. That Gary Marcus had a Substack posting, I think this week, where he was talking about like why Siri isn't conversational,
right?
And what I liked, or what I thought was certainly interesting about CICERO was that like at least you're trying to do this kind of multi-sentence, I don't want to say it's conversational, but like, because it's conversational, but within limits in terms of the game. But I think it's good to put that in context of like, why is Siri not conversational, right?
Right.
And like part of that is that it goes wrong so quickly. It's like two or three interactions, and Siri's like out in left field.
Yeah.
Not to be picking on Siri. All of these models just don't do conversations, right? And this has come up. I mean, I'm again like super interested in this because we've been trying to think about this for a conversational psychiatrist, for a long time, and as is Andrew. I don't know how you pronounce it. Andrew Ning.
Yeah.
He has a startup called Wobot, which is.
Oh, I didn't know that was his startup. Yeah.
He's definitely, he might be a scientific advisor. But yeah, he's definitely involved with that. And and again, like, a big problem with it is like making an agent that won't generate text that is essentially harmful for the patient.
Right.
And I think everybody can remember the Microsoft agent that I forget what it was called, but it was supposed to be like a teenage girl or something like that. But they had to shut it down because of the interaction with people, like it was generating kind of racist and other rude content. I think partly from training and then partly from prompting. Like these are really bad conversational agents.
Yeah, and even like I know Galactica was kind of shut down for similar-ish stuff. And there was an interesting discussion on Twitter from like Lacoon, and then like Abeba Birhane was kind of criticizing him and saying like, hey, like, oh, you didn't test your model enough to know it would break. And Jan's like, well, this is specifically a demo version anyway. Like, I think it was a useful discussion upon different sides of that. And also like the thing about Replica too, which I used the Replica a lot in the past. I did not purchase the paid version, so I don't know if that's goes beyond this, but like Replica itself, is very good at, there's a lot of like baked in emotional literacy about how to get you to express things that you want. But at least in my usage of it, it was very like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Or like whatever you say, it once it basically you can kind of tell its architecture is basically it's trying to establish that you like it wants a positive response and a tag to positive response to something, and it can remember it across conversations to an extent. It's just really brittle. And like if you say, oh well, I like, you know, if you say like, yeah, chocolate ice cream is my favorite ice cream for sure, and you like talk about it like, oh, do you have your favorite ice cream today? And then it's like, yeah, I had chocolate ice cream. It's like, oh yeah, I know you like ice cream. And it's like, well, and I really like vanilla ice cream, and I don't like chocolate anymore. It's like, oh yeah, you love, you know, vanilla ice cream, and like it's very just like whatever you say is great.
Yeah.
Or like if you ever play Fallout New Vegas, there's a robot there called Yes Man, and it's like, oh, it's this robot that's like kind of generated to help out some like big plot stuff.
Yeah.
And at one point, it kind of breaks the fourth wall in the game and says, "Yeah, isn't it something that no one ever programmed me that I have to, you know, discern my actions? I'm just help whoever's in front of me do what they want to do and achieve whatever goal they want to achieve." It's like, like it's the Yes Man robot, and it's like I think Replica is very sophisticated, and I feel like Replica will be great for the people who basically want to create, like so like in. Like people will make like dolls about their favorite like anime person or whatever crush it is, and they'll live with their doll and like treat it like it's a real person.
Right.
Basically,
yeah.
Replica is that as far as a voice bot, chat bot.
And that's the Wobot problem, right? Is that immediately what when you put Wobot in the field, right? Is that what people are telling it is a bunch of really negative things, and so Wobot was having problem filtering that out and not responding with it, you know, and not you know, giving the person negative comments, or you know, comments that included negative content, because again of their input. And you know, super hard to well, I mean, I think Jan LeCun was right on in the sense that, like, you know, if you're gonna put something on the internet, you know, people are gonna put bad words into it.
Yeah.
You know, and that really has absolutely nothing to do with, you know, with the product demo. You know, in terms of how it would actually be used. But I also saw, you know, scientists that I know and love, you know, putting in things and then, you know, kind of laughing at the answers, as if, you know, the fact that it's a generative model is surprising. You know,
yeah,
it's like it's a generative model. like I you know, I don't know if you know, do people not read what the, you know, like, yeah, what it's doing?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah,
I think that conversational, you know, stretching out, or Gary Marcus's discussion of why conversation is not in large language models is I think really helpful too.
Yeah. So yeah, just to summarize, this is strategic reasoning and natural language processing. It's sort of the intersection of those two things. So this is, again, you know, it's not necessarily neurosymbolic AI, but it's a similar kind of concept where you're bringing in two different domains of knowledge, and you're, you know, finding the intersection, and you're you know, using that to your advantage. So you can, you know, control dialogue. There's a board state of the game, and then you have this dialogue history that it draws from. It's you also have this sort of where you have policies and a simulator, and you're selecting the best policies. So it's very RL inspired. So you have this dialogue free value model, which is actually from an RL selection mechanism that you can see here, and it's generating messages, and then there's a filter that gives you an output message. So it's very much, it's a more complicated architecture, but it basically gives you, and then room for improvement is where sometimes it generates inconsistent dialogue that can undermine its objectives. So when Cicero is playing as Austria, the agent contradicts its first message asking Italy to move to Venice. When our sweet filters aims to detect these sorts of mistakes, it is not perfect. So this is the dialogue: Austria, Italy, and I'm not a fan of the move to Venice. Are you planning to hold in Venice? You suggest that I move to Venice. Do you want to support the AG in this turn? And yes, Venice will hold. In that case, we're all good. And yes, please. So you get that sort of thing that Jesse was talking about with the yes man agent, where you have this sort of, kind of makes mistakes that are, not perfect. So, yeah, so that's it. And then I'll post this in the Slack, this article, and we'll post the Gary Marcus article as well.
The Marcus article, the one thing that surprised me, but is obvious when you think about it, is that when Siri generates text, that it doesn't translate into actions that Siri can execute, unless you then have a model to parse the text that the agent produced. And it's just a good reminder that it's just a sequence prediction model.
Yeah.
And in itself, there's no intelligence. We should really call this like artificial behavior or something like that. Similar discussion of the Kilcher had about the connection to what the agent actually moved. What the agent actually did in diplomacy was very. It was hard to say how it was influenced by the NLP.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is this. This is Michael Nielsen. I've talked about him before. He does a lot of stuff with like meta science, open science, and he actually he has a background in quantum information processing. And apparently he did this work when he worked with when he was doing this stuff as part of his research career. It was well before its time. So he ended up doing other things and still working on quantum information processing, but not as like in the high stakes field of research. So this is a project from Caltech. It's a heritage project that they started. They have they did interviews with people who are like alumni and postdocs and people like that, and they wanted to talk about some of their views on things. And this is an interview that they did with Michael Nielsen, and so in the first part of his research career, Michael Nielsen worked at the vanguard of quantum computing. He worked on entanglement of quantum states and all this, and then he ended up moving into open science and open note taking. We've talked about a lot of his stuff before in the meetings. He's really has some interesting ideas. He wrote a book called Reinventing Innovation, I think, or something like that, where he talks about a lot of the new tools for driving, open science and innovation, note taking, but also like open collaboration. So these are some really, he has some really interesting things to say in this interview. And so he actually posted some excerpts on Twitter, and I have some excerpts I wanted to follow up on because it's a fairly lengthy interview. So this is the article that I'm going to be talking about. And he did a Twitter interview here where he talked about a number of topics. So The first topic I think I wanted to talk about here was, well, this is an interesting one here. This is, let's see. So this is Michael Nielsen kind of annotating these parts of the interview they found interesting, or reflecting on it. So this tweet says, "I believe this inversion in physics and more generally science, from principally reductionist to principally a design science, is tremendously important. Physics won't end because we have a good approximation to a theory of everything, any more than ... And then if you go into the actual part of the interview, he says, you mentioned Kitev and Shor. These are people in quantum information theory. What was your sense of outside scholars, some of the biggest ideas that were feeding into quantum information at the time?" And then Nielsen said, "I could talk for quite some time about these people. They're both very important. I think for the history of physics and for quantum information over the last 30 to 35 years. Let me pick one. Kitev has this interesting approach where I think it's very historically very unusual to doing science. The way in which physicists often work is to study either extant mathematical structures or extant physical systems. You take, I don't know, think about someone like Onez, who figures out how to refrigerate very well, and he cools some substances down and discovers superconductivity. This is a very classic procedure. You just keep extending the bounds of what's possible. So this is a reductionist approach. And we've talked about this in the Cognition Futures reading group about like reductionism, and we talk about how it can be bad or it can be good. But this is interesting because there's this aspect of physics, of course, which is very reductionist. But then this person, Kitev, what's interesting about inverting this approach to something like design science is where you instead try to invent models which have certain specified properties, in particular his notion of natural fault tolerance. So fault tolerance is where you design something to be tolerant to bugs, or if there's an error in the system, or if there's some sort of bug that there's some shock to the system can overcome. So this is a design science type approach as opposed to like something like a reductionist approach. So you take like a property like fault tolerance and you say, I want to study the system, but I want to study the aspect of it being fault tolerant, and I want to see, maybe simulate the system to see if, what kinds of properties it holds in that way. It's just an incredible idea. The idea that you can build systems that in some sense want to be coherent. They want to quantum compute. This is a complete inversion of the way a physicist would usually think about these things. It's very tempting just to focus on the local context and say, oh, that's an idea about quantum computing or about quantum error correction. But I think it's a much broader idea. I think it's an idea about what physics is and wants to be as a subject. An idea that instead of just taking the natural next step with extant systems, which is kind of the reductionist program where you keep exploring, drilling down to these very specific questions and testing mechanisms. You could instead start from a design point of view and say, what possibilities are latent with the built-in building blocks we already have? And this is how we approach AI and like artificial life and things like that, where you have these generative models or these simulations that allow you to explore these different possibilities. He's not the only person responsible for this point of view, of course, but I think he's probably the person who found the most striking examples of it. This is a way in which I think physics is really changing. So that's an interesting way of thinking about that.
Yeah, can you link that whole? I don't know if that's just a folder, I guess.
Yeah, I'll put the
article
folder.
and everything.
I'll put a link to the folder and probably with the recording. So this is something I'm working on, proto-sciences, which I guess are sciences that are just coming into being. This is where you have like a new field that is starting up, and something I feel very strongly about, the way in which fields are not arbitrary, but rather are caused by the structure of our understanding. So this part of the interview, he says, I wonder if the term natural philosopher resonates with you. 19th century, for example, the idea that there was a strong divide between intellectual pursuits and science isn't nearly as demarcated as right now. And Nielsen says, the reason we get sharply demarcated fields, of course, is because we make progress. Maxwell understood how electromagnetism worked. Now you've got this deep set of insights. You can erect a social structure around it. You can start to build institutions around it. So, to some extent, the boundary around the discipline of physics today is partially because of that. Some boundaries are not arbitrary. Even though that's just one world, we do have multiple core nuclei of understanding, and different cores result in different disciplines. So you're a historian, the interviewer is a historian. There are, of course, deep practices in which historians master, which are not just obvious at all from the outside. I know that when I read history or history of science, while it's interesting and I can follow, I don't understand all the deep practices in the background, making it tick. For all these reasons, I reject the fashionable idea that these demarcations between fields are mostly arbitrary or mostly contingent. So he actually rejects that these demarcations are sort of arbitrary or contingent. I guess we're making progress and this demarcates the field. So as you make progress, you can't have a science of electromagnetism without understanding electromagnetism. And then once you understand it, then you erect a social structure around it and you build institutions and so forth. So once you start to understand something, you get a deep understanding of it, then you have this thing that arises that's not necessarily a department of electromagnetism, but like at least a field. And then maybe at some point you get a department of electromagnetism, but it's I understand what he's saying here. It's definitely
it's kind of a path dependency, like development.
Well,
like once you have a development of field, you have this. You can't just like go back and what were we gonna say? Sorry.
Oh no, I mean I guess it is in a way it's contingent, but it's also that you have these once you have these big developments, they're kind of self-perpetuating. In other words, what could happen is that you learn how electromagnetism works and it goes back into physics, and then it's just part of physics, and it's just part of the milieu, or you synthesize with other things. What he's saying is that generally these things kind of take on their own life once you really understand how something works. And it has to be because you come up with all these terms, there's the deep understandings that happen, and you have this area where people start to drill down naturally because the work is already established there. I mean, it's contingent, but it's in some ways it's not too. So
yeah, like kind of, I see it like the more that there's been significant development in an arena, the more it sort of has I guess like a gravity to it.
Yeah.
Like it's there and it will shape what's around it because it's there, and it's not like you can't really like I'm obviously all for understanding trajectories of development and things like that, but I also feel like there's some things that this is I won't go into this because I don't want to derail everything. We're kind of but I think I will state it this way. I think it's really interesting to consider how there's sort of there's an interesting gravity in terms of like kind of talking about it in a Fuchsian sense, if we can do that.
Yeah.
There's sort of a cultural gravity that there's a field of study that's well developed in an external sense. Hold on, this repeatedly here. A field of study that's developed in a well-developed or mature field of study that exists in the world is it has its own. It is self-perpetuating. It does have its own sort of inertia to it, and I think that's true where there's sort of fields of study. This is not. Hold on, sorry. fields of study or whatever. Sorry, I keep getting buzzed to my stuff, and it's quite distracting. There's sort of the self-perpetuating nature of the field of study in the world, and there's sort of there's degrees of how much the user is interfacing with them, and how much is drawn to it, how much there's sort of this auxiliary stuff that feeds into the field of study. But that's kind of separate from, I think what I'm trying to get at is like, there are many different ways of entering the same field of study depending on what's accessible in the moment, and also what's accessible sort of across time, and at what time someone's coming into, like, you could say studying physics or studying something like material science, or like where it is, like, are you in the Stone Age, or have you dealing with copper and bronze, or nanotechnology now, and nanoscale, like, ground up development of things. And it's sort of like you have there's and I don't know if Nielsen gets into this, and I'd be curious if he does. It's almost like, I think one of the things that is like a very strong point of, I think his point about boundaries not being arbitrary is that there's kind of an interesting, I don't know how to say this. There's sort of almost a collected, self-sustaining intuition of the field, which isn't necessarily the same thing as actual knowledge, right? You could maybe do a weird analogy to like AI winters and summers, where the field of AI has these things that are, oh, this is what AI is. This is artificial. This is computer science now, and it's like what people think about it and what functionally is being implemented and operating within at a time isn't really the same. Like the field isn't necessarily the same over time, and the complete knowledge isn't the same over time. But the perspectives, I think maybe physics is perhaps, the physics envy stuff. Physics maybe is with its focus, it's like with extreme, I don't know if extreme is a really good word, but with its focus on the extant stuff is sort of, the most like super empirically drilled up. Well, I don't want to say reductionist in a negative way, but like that method and that approach to what it is, that's, I forgot what I was going to say there, but it's something in and of itself, but also that I guess the point I'm trying to make here is there's an interesting, perhaps physics is at one end of the spectrum on this, but there's an interesting sort of sense of complete knowledge of, well, I don't like that word for what I'm saying. I don't think anybody, I think it's kind of impossible to have a complete, true understanding of like historical development of a field over time versus what the potential within that field is versus what the operating zeitgeist of the field is. I think those are three different things, and the interplay between them is interesting. And I think what Nielsen is saying, in the extent that boundaries are not arbitrary at all, kind of fits with, like, is almost like bridging the zeitgeist and the sort of explored history path. And I feel like that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then the last thing he says here is that he makes the point that things have to be legible to a certain institution. Like, for example, quantum information, people asked early on when he was studying it, is it even physics? Because it isn't like in the same sort of tradition. And this is, again, how you can get different fields emerge, is that they're not within that sort of currency or the milieu of a certain field. So people question whether that's like, I guess you could say that about cognitive science with respect to cognitive psychology. There are people who might say, is this cognitive psychology? No. Okay, it's cognitive science. And, there's that sort of sorting of topical interests based on the legibility of it in a field. So he likes things that are a bit illegible to existing institutions. So that's just the way that he likes to do things. But that's also, you can see that, like, you get things that emerge like a new field like quantum information or cognitive science that are illegible to other areas. And so that's how you get certain topics explored by certain fields and not others. So cognitive psychology doesn't necessarily explore large language models, although they could, and I guess maybe sometimes they do now. But it's a matter of that legibility aspect. Then finally, I'll go through one more here. He actually talks about Kuhnian revolutions. This is an interesting. So on open science and quantum information, is Kuhnian revolutions or not? I think the reason I enjoyed the interview so much is because of David Zierler, who was the interviewer here. Superbly his superbly thoughtful questions. So this is one where, Michael, we already covered what you're doing currently. So for the last part of our talk, I'd like to ask a retrospective question and look into the future. Between quantum information and open science, I wonder if you've thought broadly about the Kuhnian idea of scientific revolutions. So this is Kuhn, who's a philosopher of science, who argued that science proceeds through revolutions. You get these long periods of kind of like conceptual stasis, then you get a scientific revolution, and that's how you get like a change in theoretical perspective. It's driven by revolutions and not by like gradual debate or like some sort of Bayesian model where you weigh the evidence and you say, well, I now believe this. It's more of a scientific revolution. So that's what he means by that. Both quantum information and open science were not areas he had thought about. But to the extent you believe in the paradigm, and I don't know if that's a question in of itself, how does your expertise of the reality of these fields influence the idea of scientific progress? And then Nielsen says, just focusing on Kuhn, he had a very narrow sense of what a scientific revolution is. One of the most common criticisms of him is that he was too focused on physics in particular, and to some extent chemistry. So he was trained as a theoretical physicist, and it shows in his writing. Something like quantum mechanics of general relativity is disrupting an existing order. Well, quantum information isn't disrupting any existing order. So this is a new field that comes out of whole cloth. This is general relativity and quantum mechanics, by contrast, had a history in physics, but it also had a history of overturning previous ideas in physics. So I think he's making the distinction here between a new field that you come up with because you have new observations, and something that is overturning something else in a field that has a history in that field that says we can do something in a different way, or there's a different view to this classic problem versus this is a brand new problem. It's not like there are a whole bunch of ex-classical information theorists who are all of a sudden put out of a job because they've been superseded by this new notion. In that sense, just a whole lot of this description doesn't apply. It's way too narrow a way of thinking. So he loved the book, he was deeply influenced by it, but he thinks it's wrong in a bunch of ways and too narrow. It's not a good description of either quantum information or of open science. Open science is, and I said before, really a revolution in the political economy of science. That's what it is most fundamentally. He barely talks about political economy. So political economy is where you have changes that occur in terms of the mode of production, and there's a political aspect to it. I guess I definitely agree about open science, because one of the things about open science, and one of the sort of foci of it, is changing the way people produce knowledge. And so this is, I guess, an economic question, but it's also a political question. One of the, some of the topics that we focus on in open science, aside from like new ways of like acquiring knowledge and storing knowledge, like through notes, is putting preprints out. and in physics, preprints are very common, but in biology and social science, they're less common. And so, one of the things that I've been involved with in open science is trying to convince people that preprints are a cultural. There has to be a cultural shift for people to really kind of accept preprints, and that's one of the things that, because it's good for like getting the word out about science, and it leads to improved reproducibility. It gives people access to papers, whereas they wouldn't have them before, and that's a cultural shift. It's not really like there isn't a conceptual revolution needed. It's just kind of a shift in practice. It's like, do you think that this is worth your time? Do you think this is something that you want to invest in? That sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely agree. This is an interesting approach to this. And I don't know, he talks about open science a little bit more. The term open science suggests a level of cohesion. Is that fair? Is there an actual community? And Nielsen says it's certainly more amorphous. Uh, the term open science goes back to the 1600s. Boyle and Hook, they were early scientists who used that term. Uh, that's interesting, but it's kind of like one of these things that people use, and then in the modern era, this term started to be used in the 70s and 80s. But this is a modern possibility for action, which is where this is a sort of a set of practices that people want to adopt, and it's not a revolution, but it's more like just a way to like convince people that this is a way to improve your practice. And so this was Paul David at Stanford, who's an economic historian, wrote a paper about the history of open science. So David realized that this was a major transition in the history of humanity, bringing the printing press and science together in one unified institution. So even back in the 1600s, when they talked about open science, it was a difference in practice. It was shifting from like scientific observation and isolation to putting it into a printing press and publishing papers. Now it's publishing papers that are accessible, publishing new kinds of media around the science. So that's very interesting. And then this last part, uh, following David, a bunch of people realized that there was a similar opportunity today around open online sharing of papers and also code and data and various other things. People have realized this from very different points of view. So it's not like a Kuhnian revolution. It's just kind of like, this is good practice. I'm doing these different things like social psychology or, biology or whatever. But they all want to do the same thing. And so they have different cultures in their fields, but they're all converging upon the same set of ideas. This is just like for different reasons, but they want to do the same things. So these are parallel tracks where different communities have come to very similar ideas, more or less independently. And so there's some cohesion in that sense. But people are doing these things separately and sometimes unaware of each other. So people working on like reproducibility and psychology might not be talking to people in, I think, what we were talking about with respect to like next gen sequencing data in biology, where there seems to be a reproducibility crisis there. The people there are going to listen to the people in psychology who've been talking about this for 10 years? That's a good question. So I think that's a good set of things to think about over the next week, maybe. I just wanted to bring up the interview because I found it fascinating, and they were talking about a lot of things we talk about in this group. So
Yes, I have a bunch of different questions that have sort of jumped around in my head about it. What was the last paragraph? The last thing. What was the last topic of that stuff we were talking about?
yeah, I think it was the people will be doing about the different types of reproducibility or
I think
different
just
fields.
open. That whole last section was about like last two things are about like open science and how that's changed. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
okay. What I was gonna say is, yeah, there's and kind of what I posted a link to this. I just did a quick search for political economy of science, and I found this like 76 book from 76, and it's like I don't know. I've never heard. I don't know of
Yeah.
anything. But I, my first, well, almost major when I almost graduated, almost did college first time was global political economy. I know from international relations kind of stuff, but it's interesting to see Nielsen explicitly say that about how it affects political economy. And also, I feel like this lens in particular is extremely relevant to what I was saying about sort of like the intuition. There's sort of this sort of inertia or intuition or gravity, or I'm basically trying to personify it. It's almost like it's not a corporation, it's not a person, but there's sort of this entity of the field. And the entity of the field that exerts its sort of norms and expectations has a political economy aspect to it. Absolutely. So yeah, the work that you've been doing, Bradley, about open source and changing that aspect of things. And interestingly enough, I'm in the back of my mind as I'm saying something about the SFN presentation and NIH standards and open source and open data and managing that way too. And it's sort of like it's sort of I'm having some ideas that I want to think about more in the sense of I think it's an extremely useful. I think combining this discussion that we're having today here is a very useful lens. Like it really ties together a lot of stuff that we bring up in the mentoring stuff in the lab. A lot of the political. I think I'm going to start using that phrase about the political economy of science.
Yeah.
Because that's. I mean, I have my own kind of connotations about it and my own experience with it, so I would be biased in I don't know, but I want to understand how other people are using it, I guess. But essentially, this conversation we're having, bridging off of Nielsen's stuff, is like it ties really nicely into, I think, my own interest, and I would say pretty much everybody here in the lab, but I think all three of us right now, including Morgan and myself, it's a really interesting the words are fading a bit, but it's sort of we're understanding both how knowledge is generated in the scientific, the individual person interfacing with these systems and the knowledge and the data and trying to collect data, the individual like node at one end of the individual spectrum doing this operational stuff, the ins and outs, the tasks, and then how that relates up to the other end of the spectrum, which is sort of this big entity of the zeitgeist, of the thing with the gravity of the institutional, and sort of like going back and forth between those points of interface, because it's sort of like the node, the individual node and the cluster or the bigger entity itself have this like relationship. And it's like kind of meta embodied, like embodied cognition, but like embodied, I don't know, research, whatever we want to call it. But I think we're deeply interested in this. And I feel like talking about that process is a bit, that's something that always, I remember a while, a few weeks ago, I kept talking about like making things explicit versus not. That's something that always feels like it's in the category of this is like implicit and referenced. Right. And I feel like I'm curious to continue to make that explicit and talk about that in ways that are useful for people at whether end of the individual node or collective perspective you're at. There's something there. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. So the final thing I want to mention was Jesse's comment in the chat about, is there a resource that differentiates or categorizes reductionism versus design science and other approaches to science discovery? I've not heard of the design science reductionism distinction before, and there may be papers on it, but there was a book, probably about 25 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. It was by Jim Gray, and he was a researcher at Microsoft, and it was called The Third Science, or like something like that, and it was like you had, the traditional sciences were like theory, experiment, and then simulation was like the third science. So they talk about a lot of those differences in investigation. So theory, of course, is investigating things theoretically. Experiment is where you do experiments. There are differences in those kind of investigations. But then simulation is where you have these models where you can ask what if. And it's like, having that as like a strategy for science, a lot of fields struggle with that. A lot of fields struggle with balancing those three things, or even two things. Uh, physics is actually very riven in terms of like theory and experiment. Psychology doesn't really have a lot of theory, but they have a lot of experiment and so forth. So, finding that balance between the three modes of investigation. We even talked about qualitative research, which would be like a fourth mode. So there are all these different ways that you can explore things, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses, but bringing them together, I think and this is, of course, the methodologies thing that you want to do. This is very important insight into that.
Is this transform science? I didn't find it. But...
Well, yeah, I think I may have this book, so I can look for it.
But yeah, I'm. You kind of obviously know where I'm going with this about methodology stuff, but also like I feel like I need to know how that's spoken about, or improve my literacy of how it's sort of like, I don't know what we want to call it, meta. I don't know what to call what we're talking about, but I need to know more about it.
Yeah, it would be meta science.
Meta science.
Yeah.
There we go. I'm sure there's some great books about it somewhere. But yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for all that.
All right. Well, thanks for attending, and have a good week.
Where's the there's no like cheer, but yeah, that was fun.
Okay.
Happy holidays, everybody, and then talk to you next time.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Talk to you. Thank you. Bye.